The billionaire leaned back in his chair and whispered something to his attorney. His attorney covered his mouth and laughed. 3 jurors saw it. The judge saw it. The entire gallery saw it. They were laughing at the girl on the witness stand. Sarah Donovan was 24 years old. She wore a black dress she had borrowed from her mother and shoes she had bought at a thrift store on Gratiot Avenue. She was not a lawyer. She was not an expert witness. She was a night school law student who worked the register at a gas station 4 days a week and studied contract law in the parking lot on her breaks. Her father, Tom Donovan, had been a janitor at Preston Technologies for 11 years. He cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and mopped the labs on the 4th floor. The labs where they stored chemicals that were never supposed to touch human skin. He died 9 months ago. The doctors said it was organ failure. The company said it was unrelated to his work. But Tom Donovan kept a notebook. A leather notebook, hidden inside a coffee can in the back of his work locker for over a decade. Dates, chemical names, disposal locations, and on one page, one single page, the handwritten signature of James Preston, approving the storage of toxic materials in an unventilated room where his janitor worked every night. When Sarah opened that notebook on the witness stand and began reading aloud, the billionaire stopped laughing. His attorney stopped laughing. The courtroom stopped breathing. And the billion-dollar empire began to crack. Pause for 2 seconds and help me do something fun. Comment your city and country. I want to see how global this community really is. And I am looking for the 2 viewers watching the farthest apart today so I can pin the winner. Now back to the story, because things are about to get very interesting. Tom Donovan started at Preston Technologies on a Monday in March, 11 years before he died. He was 38 years old, had no college degree, and had spent the previous 6 years driving a delivery truck for a medical supply company that went bankrupt. He needed work. Preston Technologies was hiring janitorial staff for their research campus in Warren, Michigan, just north of Detroit. The pay was $16.50 an hour. The benefits were decent. The shifts were overnight. Tom was quiet, dependable, and invisible, which is exactly what a janitor is supposed to be in a building where the average salary is $140,000. He clocked in at 10 p.m., cleaned 4 floors, and clocked out at 6 a.m. He knew every hallway, every supply closet, every shortcut between the server rooms and the loading dock. Home was a small brick house on Chalmers Street on the east side of Detroit. His wife, Amanda Donovan, worked as a home health aide, 12-hour shifts 3 days a week. Their daughter, Sarah, was 13 when Tom started at Preston. She was sharp, stubborn, and read everything she could get her hands on. Tom used to joke that Sarah would argue with a stop sign and win. Every morning when Tom got home from work, Sarah was at the kitchen table, eating cereal and reading before school. He would sit across from her, still in his uniform, and ask the same question. "What did you learn yesterday?" And she would tell him. Every day. History, science, math, whatever she was reading. Tom never finished high school. He got his GED at 22, but he made sure his daughter knew that learning was not optional in his house. "You don't have to be the smartest person in the room," he told her once. "You just have to be the one who wrote it down." He said it like a joke, but he meant it, because Tom Donovan wrote everything down. In his 3rd year at Preston Technologies, Tom was assigned to clean the 4th floor labs. These were the chemical research labs where Preston's team developed industrial solvents for automotive manufacturing. The labs had ventilation systems, protective equipment, and safety protocols posted on every wall. The storage room next to Lab 4C did not. It was a converted supply closet, no larger than a bedroom. No ventilation, no sealed containers. Just metal drums, some leaking, stacked on wooden pallets. Tom's job was to mop the floor around the drums once a week. The smell was sharp enough to make his eyes water. He asked his supervisor about it. His supervisor told him to wear gloves and keep the door propped open. That night, Tom went home, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a leather notebook he had bought at a dollar store. He wrote the date, the time, the room number, the names on the drums he could read, and a description of the smell. He drew a diagram of the room. He noted the absence of ventilation. Then he put the notebook in a coffee can, sealed the lid, and put the can in the back of his locker at work. He did this every week for 11 years. Subscribe now and stay to the end, because I am going to show you one page from that notebook that quietly explains why Preston Technologies' own safety director resigned 6 months before the trial, and you will not unsee it once I point it out. This is not applause. This is exposure. And we are about to break down exactly how they did it, step by step. In Tom's 7th year at Preston Technologies, something changed. The chemical storage had expanded. 3 new rooms on the 4th floor were being used to store materials that Tom had never seen before. Drums with hazard labels partially scratched off. Containers with no labels at all. The smell was worse. Tom started getting headaches after his shifts, then nosebleeds, then a cough that wouldn't go away. He reported the conditions to his supervisor in writing 4 times. He received no response. He filed a complaint with the building safety office. The safety officer inspected the 4th floor and submitted a report. Nothing changed. Then one night, Tom found something. He was mopping Lab 4C at approximately 2:15 a.m. when he noticed a clipboard hanging from a hook on the storage room door. It was an internal authorization form, a 1-page document titled Temporary Chemical Storage Approval. The form listed the room number, the types of chemicals being stored, and a note at the bottom, ventilation upgrade deferred, storage approved as is, pending budget review. At the bottom of the form, 2 signatures. The first was the facilities director. The second was James Preston. Tom didn't take the clipboard. He didn't photograph it. He didn't have a camera phone. This was 2013. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He opened his notebook and copied the entire form by hand. Every word, every chemical name, every date. And at the bottom he wrote, "Signature on the form, James Preston, CEO." I recognized the handwriting from company memos posted in the break room. He put the notebook back in the coffee can. He finished mopping. He went home. 4 years later, his organs began to fail. Tom Donovan died on a Thursday morning in September. He was 49 years old. Amanda was beside him. Sarah held his hand. The cause of death was listed as multi-organ failure, secondary to prolonged chemical exposure. Tom's doctors had flagged that 2 years earlier, elevated levels of industrial solvents in his blood, consistent with long-term inhalation in an unventilated space. The doctors reported it. The company denied any connection. Amanda Donovan wanted to sue. She went to 3 attorneys. The first 2 said the same thing. Preston Technologies had a legal team that had never lost a workplace injury case. The statute of limitations on the safety complaints had expired. The medical evidence was strong, but not airtight. It would cost more to fight than the family could afford. The third attorney was Ellen Cooper. She was 41, operated out of a small office in Ferndale, and had spent her career in workers' compensation and toxic tort cases. She was not famous. She was not rich. But when Amanda brought her a box of Tom's things from his locker, including a sealed coffee can, and Ellen opened the can and saw the notebook, she sat down and did not speak for a full minute. "How long did he keep this?" Ellen asked. 11 years, Amanda said. Ellen turned to the last entry. Tom had written it 4 days before he was hospitalized. His handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven. It read, September 2nd, still coughing blood. Room 4C still not ventilated. Nobody asks about the drums anymore. I keep writing because someone will read this. Ellen closed the notebook. She looked at Amanda. Someone is reading it now. She filed the lawsuit the following month. Donovan versus Preston Technologies. Wrongful death, negligence, concealment of hazardous materials. She named James Preston personally. Real quick, pause and drop a comment below. Tell me if you have ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, but were told to stay silent. Share your thoughts, because this community is built on people who refuse to look away. James Preston was 54 years old and worth $4.1 billion. Preston Technologies was the largest industrial chemical research firm in the Midwest. He had 14,000 employees, government contracts, and a board of directors that treated him like a king. When the lawsuit landed on his desk, he didn't flinch. He called David Lawson, a senior litigation partner at his firm, a man who billed $1,200 an hour and had a 93% trial win rate. "It's a janitor's family," James said. "What do they have?" "A wrongful death claim, some medical records, and apparently a notebook." James frowned. "A notebook?" Their attorney referenced it in the complaint, some kind of personal journal the janitor kept. About what? Chemical storage, safety violations, dates, and times. James leaned back. "That's hearsay, a dead man's diary. No judge is letting that in." David nodded. "I'll move to exclude. We'll challenge the medical causation, argue the exposure was environmental, and bury them in depositions. This case won't see a jury." But Judge Kathleen Nelson did not agree with David Lawson's assessment. She reviewed the notebook in chambers, consulted the rules of evidence, and ruled that the notebook qualified as a business record exception to hearsay, because Tom had made each entry contemporaneously, in the regular course of his duties, with no motive to fabricate. The notebook was admitted. David Lawson walked out of chambers with the first crack in this confidence. If you love your mom, you need to subscribe right now, because at the end of this video, I am revealing one secret that nobody in that courtroom understood. There is a reason James Preston's own safety director resigned before the trial. And when I show you what that director knew, you will realize this cover-up went deeper than anyone imagined. Trust me, the secret is worth it. The courtroom was packed. Local press, environment advocacy groups. 3 rows of Preston Technologies employees who had been given the day off, a gesture that looked like support but felt like surveillance. James Preston sat at the defense table in a $6,000 suit, flanked by David Lawson and 2 associate attorneys. He looked composed. He looked like a man who had already won. Ellen Cooper sat at the plaintiff's table with Amanda Donovan. Amanda wore black. Her hands were folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Sarah Donovan sat in the gallery behind her mother. She carried a backpack with her law school textbooks inside, and in the front pocket of the backpack, in a sealed plastic bag, was the leather notebook. David Lawson's opening statement was surgical. He presented Preston Technologies as a responsible corporate citizen. He showed the jury the company's safety certifications, its compliance awards, its annual environmental audits. He argued Tom Donovan's illness was tragic but not traceable to a single source. He called the notebook a personal diary with no scientific basis. Ellen Cooper's opening was short. Tom Donovan was a janitor. He mopped floors. He emptied trash. He worked in a room with toxic chemicals and no ventilation for 11 years. He told his supervisors. He filed complaints. Nobody listened. So he did the one thing he could do. He wrote it down. Everything, every night, for 11 years. And on one page of that notebook, the CEO of this company signed his name to a form that approved the storage of those chemicals in that room, knowing there was no ventilation. Tom Donovan is dead, but his handwriting is alive, and this jury is going to read every word. David Lawson spent the first day building his case. Medical experts who testified that Tom's exposure could not be conclusively linked to his workplace. Safety inspectors who confirmed the building had passed its most recent audit. Former supervisors who said they never received complaints. It was clean, professional, expensive, and on the surface, it was working. But Ellen Cooper had a strategy. She let day one belong to the defense. She didn't object to the medical experts. She barely cross-examined. She sat quietly, took notes, and waited. On the morning of day 2, she stood and said, "The plaintiff calls Sarah Donovan." A murmur moved through the courtroom. David Lawson looked at his notes. Sarah Donovan was listed as a fact witness. 24 years old, no degree, no credentials. A gas station clerk. James Preston leaned toward David and whispered. David covered his mouth. They both smiled. 3 jurors saw it. The judge saw it. The gallery saw it. Sarah walked to the stand. She wore the black dress. She sat down. She looked at the jury. Not the attorneys, not the billionaire. Ellen began. Ms. Donovan, what is your relationship to the plaintiff? Tom Donovan was my father. How old were you when he began working at Preston Technologies? 13. Did your father ever talk to you about his work? Every morning, he would come home from his shift, sit at the kitchen table while I was eating breakfast, and tell me about his night. He talked about the machines, the hallways, the people. He talked about the chemicals. What did he say about the chemicals? He said the smell was so bad some nights that he would hold his breath while he mopped. He said he asked for a mask and was told the room didn't require one. He said he filed complaints and nobody responded. David Lawson stood. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is testifying to statements made by the decedent. This is hearsay. Judge Nelson looked at Ellen. Counselor? Your Honor, I'm establishing the witness's personal knowledge and the context in which the notebook was maintained. I'm not offering the father's statements for the truth of the matter. I'm establishing why he kept the record. Overruled. Continue. Ellen turned back to Sarah. Ms. Donovan, are you familiar with a notebook your father kept during his employment at Preston Technologies? Yes. How did you become aware of it? After my father died, my mother and I went to his workplace to collect his things. His locker was mostly empty, but in the back, there was a coffee can with the lid sealed. Inside was a leather notebook. Had you ever seen this notebook before? Never. My father never told us about it. I think he was afraid that if anyone knew it existed, it would disappear. Ellen picked up the notebook from the evidence table. It was small, brown, worn at the edges. She handed it to Sarah. Ms. Donovan, please open the notebook to the first entry. Sarah opened it. Her hands were steady, but her eyes glistened. March 14th. First night cleaning 4th floor labs. Supply closet next to lab 4C. No ventilation. 14 drums, no labels on 6. Chemical smell, eyes watering. Supervisor said wear gloves. No mask offered. Mopped floor. Smell stayed on my clothes. Amanda made me leave my uniform in the garage. The courtroom was silent. Sarah turned the page. March 21st. Same closet. 2 new drums. One is leaking from the base. Reported to supervisor. He said maintenance would handle it. Drew a diagram of the room. She held up the notebook. The jury could see the diagram. A small rectangle with X marks where the drums sat. An arrow pointing to the word leak. Sarah kept reading. Entry after entry. Week after week. Month after month. Chemical names she had looked up in her law school library. Disposal methods that violated federal regulations. Dates that matched the company's own internal safety reports. The reports that said everything was fine. 20 minutes. She read for 20 minutes. Nobody moved. Nobody objected. The jury was leaning forward. 2 jurors were taking notes. One was pressing her hand against her mouth. Then Sarah reached the page. Your Honor, Ellen said, I'd like the witness to read the entry dated November 9th from 7 years ago. Sarah turned to the page. She paused. She looked at her mother in the gallery. Amanda nodded once, barely. Sarah read. November 9th. Found clipboard on storage room door. Form titled Temporary Chemical Storage Approval. Lists room 4C. Lists chemicals by code. Note at the bottom says ventilation upgrade deferred. Storage approved as is pending budget review. 2 signatures. Facilities Director R. Munoz. Second signature, James Preston. I know the handwriting. It matches the memos in the break room. I copied everything, word for word. The courtroom erupted, not in shouting, in a low collective gasp that turned into whispers that turned into movement. Reporters reached for their phones. The jury foreman's pen stopped mid-stroke. James Preston's face went white. Not red, white. The color of a man watching his own signature destroy him. David Lawson stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is reading from a document that contains a handwritten copy of an alleged form. The original form has not been produced. There is no way to authenticate the signature." Judge Nelson looked at Ellen. "Counselor, do you have the original?" Ellen stood. "No, Your Honor. Preston Technologies was ordered to produce all safety authorization documents during discovery. They stated under oath that no such form existed." She paused. The courtroom held its breath. "However, I have one more witness. The former facilities director whose name appears on that form, Robert Munoz. He's waiting in the hallway, and he brought his copy." If you are still watching, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode, because this exact pattern of corporate concealment and courtroom revenge shows up in another tech billionaire case I am covering soon. And the strategy Sarah uses here becomes even more important in that story. Robert Munoz was 59 years old. He had been the facilities director at Preston Technologies for 8 years before he was quietly let go, 2 weeks after Tom Donovan filed his 4th safety complaint. He walked to the stand carrying a manila envelope. He sat down. He did not look at James Preston. "Mr. Munoz, did you sign a temporary chemical storage approval form for room 4C on the 4th floor of Preston Technologies?" Ellen asked. "Yes." "Who instructed you to sign it?" "Spencer Graham, the CFO. He said it came from the top. He said Mr. Preston had already approved it." "Did you see Mr. Preston's signature on the form?" "Yes, he signed it before I did. My signature is second." "Do you have a copy of that form?" "I kept a copy of everything I signed. That was my policy. When I was terminated, I took my personal files with me." He opened the envelope and produced a single sheet of paper. "This is the original." Ellen took it. She placed it on the projector. The courtroom screen lit up with the form. Room 4C, chemical codes, the note about deferred ventilation, and at the bottom, 2 signatures. The second was Robert Munoz. The first, in sharp blue ink, was James Preston. David Lawson was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, this document was not produced in discovery. It has not been authenticated by a handwriting expert. This is—" "Mr. Lawson," Judge Nelson interrupted, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "Your client was asked to produce all safety authorization forms. Your client stated under oath that no such form existed. Either the form doesn't exist and Mr. Munoz is lying, or the form does exist and your client committed perjury." She leaned forward. "Which one is it?" David Lawson said nothing. He sat down. James Preston stared at the screen, his own handwriting, his own name, his own approval. The room where Tom Donovan mopped toxic chemicals every night for 11 years. The room that killed him. Spencer Graham, the CFO, was sitting in the gallery. He stood up, walked to the exit, and left the courthouse without a word. He would later be served with a subpoena and would testify that James Preston personally authorized the storage, personally deferred the ventilation upgrade, and personally instructed him to destroy all copies of the form after Tom Donovan's safety complaints escalated. The one copy they missed was in a retired facilities director's filing cabinet, and the handwritten duplicate was inside a coffee can in the back of a dead janitor's locker. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 14 minutes. They found Preston Technologies liable for the wrongful death of Tom Donovan. They found James Preston personally liable for concealment of hazardous conditions. They awarded Amanda Donovan $14.2 million in compensatory damages and $38 million in punitive damages. But here is the detail I told you to wait for. The secret that nobody in that courtroom understood at the time. James Preston's safety director, a man named Carl Engel, had resigned 6 months before the trial. No explanation. No public statement. He simply left. Everyone assumed it was unrelated. It was not unrelated. During the trial, Ellen Cooper received a sealed envelope at her office. No return address. Inside was a single document, a memo from Carl Engel to James Preston, dated 18 months before Tom Donovan's death. The memo stated that air quality testing on the 4th floor had detected solvent concentrations 11 times above OSHA permissible exposure limits. The memo recommended immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel from the 4th floor and emergency ventilation installation. James Preston's response was written in the margin of the memo, in the same blue ink, in the same handwriting. 3 words, not cost-effective. Tom Donovan mopped that floor for 18 more months. He died 9 months after that. Ellen forwarded the memo to the EPA. The EPA referred it to the Department of Justice. A federal grand jury was convened. James Preston was indicted on charges of willful violation of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, concealment of hazardous materials, and obstruction of justice for ordering the destruction of the original storage approval form. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 8 years. Spencer Graham cooperated with federal prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 2 years. Carl Engel, the safety director who resigned and mailed the memo, was granted immunity. Preston Technologies stock fell 61% in 3 months. The board removed James Preston's name from the company. The 4th floor labs were permanently sealed. Sarah Donovan graduated from law school 14 months after the verdict. She finished first in her class. On the night of her graduation, she sat at the kitchen table in the house on Chalmers Street. The same table where her father used to sit across from her every morning, still in his uniform, and ask, "What did you learn yesterday?" Amanda sat next to her. The leather notebook was on the table between them. Sarah had brought it home from Ellen Cooper's office in a sealed evidence bag. The court had returned it after sentencing. She opened it to the first page. March 14th, first night cleaning 4th floor labs. "He wrote every single week," Sarah said. "For 11 years, he never missed." Amanda touched the cover. "He always said the same thing. If nobody asks, at least I'll have the answer ready." Sarah closed the notebook and held it against her chest. He was right. Cassie, Amanda. The correction was unnecessary. Amanda looked at her daughter, the first lawyer in the family, the girl who used to argue with stop signs, the woman who had stood on a witness stand and read a dead man's handwriting until a billionaire's empire cracked. "Your father would say you didn't just learn something yesterday," Amanda said. "You taught the whole room." Sarah didn't respond. She just held the notebook. The leather was soft from 11 years of handling. The pages smelled like coffee and the chemical sharpness that never quite left Tom Donovan's hands. She would keep it for the rest of her life. Tom Donovan could not afford a lawyer. He could not afford a doctor who would fight for him. He could not afford to quit the job that was killing him because his family needed the insurance. But he could afford a notebook, a dollar store notebook with lined pages and a leather cover. And every week, for 11 years, he sat in the back of his locker room and wrote down what he saw, what he smelled, what he reported, and what nobody did about it. He was not building a legal case. He was keeping a record. The difference is that a legal case needs a strategy. A record only needs the truth. And the truth, written down by a man nobody listened to, turned out to be more powerful than a $4.1 billion company, a $1,200 an hour attorney, and a CEO who thought he could sign a piece of paper and make it disappear. The most dangerous thing in that courtroom was not a lawyer. It was not an expert witness. It was not a federal investigation. It was a notebook, kept by a janitor, hidden in a coffee can, read aloud by his daughter. Because some evidence doesn't need a forensic lab or a digital trail. Some evidence just needs someone who cared enough to write it down, and someone brave enough to read it out loud. Click the video on your right to see the 3 other corporate espionage cases where self-representation destroyed billion-dollar companies, the legal loopholes they exploited, and the one statute that changes everything. You will see the patterns these strategists use, the mistakes their opponents make, and the exact moment when the trap closes.